Welcome to the third piece breakdown.
Creating a business is hard. Making it successful and viable is even harder. With almost 10 years of experience creating and building a sustainable knitwear brand, we're excited to kick off this new series where we're going to share the ins and outs of the business, who we are, and what we do. I'm Kristen Lambert, the founder of Third Piece.
I'm Hayley Mabry, the brand director here at Third Piece. Follow along with us on this continuous journey while we build the next American sustainable fashion brand.
Welcome everyone, my name is Kristen.
Hi, I'm Hayley.
And we are excited to bring to you the Third Piece breakdown. This is a project we have been talking about for months, maybe years at this point. Really wanting to find ways to share what's happening with us as a small business, especially over the last year, and really just provide more transparency about our business and how we've been growing it, how we've been adapting and pivoting over the last year, and also let you know who are the people and the work that we do that go into the products and things that you see.
Awesome. Yes, I'm so excited for this project. Just like Kristen said, it's something we've talked a lot about. So why don't we just dive right in? We can all agree the past year has been a little bit of craziness for us all. So Kristen and I are gonna chat with you a little bit today about what's been happening here at Third Piece over the last year and where, the last 6 months for us and where we see ourselves in the future. So with that, Kristen, do you want to tell us a little bit more about how we got here, just in general?
Yeah, so the theme today, and one of the main things that we've been really wanting to share and talk about, is the supply chain. And for those of you that might be wondering, like, what is supply chain and what does it mean? It essentially just means the process of which all of the materials, the raw materials, and the bits and pieces that go into the products and things that you might be buying, how it kind of comes to be and gets to your door. So for us, we're a knitwear brand. So for us, our supply chain has to do with dealing with like the starting point is like farms. A lot of our materials are plant-based or animal-based, being wool and sheep. So we work with mills and factories overseas. And really since day one, probably like the first real challenge as a business owner that I experienced was with the supply chain. So if you're an aspiring knitwear designer, if you're in the knitwear field and that's how you ended up here, you might be going through this as well, because in the beginning, and even still now, even after being in business for 9 years, the biggest challenge we often have is figuring out the yarns that we are gonna buy. How do we project how much we need? What is it that's gonna go into the collection? How much do we need to order and in what colors? That whole process really is something that can take months and months of planning and building out, and a significant amount of capital in order to get there. So Hayley's looking at me because we're going through it right now. Like, we're really going through this challenge with our supply chain, and a lot of it's coming from the pandemic and some of the things that are happening. But even looking back to like year one of the business, this came about because in the first year, to kind of share a little bit more about the background about Third Piece, I called every yarn store in the country and I bought this one type of yarn that was a really soft, chunky yarn. It was called Twinkle by Wenlin. And I basically bought all this yarn, and essentially that's how the first kind of season of knit pieces, we were making one-of-a-kind hand knit pieces, came to be. Year two, I reached out to the brand and was able to get an order directly with them because I was growing. We had some like really big accounts that were picking up orders. And then I got a call that like the yarn wasn't coming in. So the factory like changed the dye, something happened, and all of the orders that we had been working really hard to secure, we're not gonna get the materials in order to make them.
So what did you do?
I freaked out for a moment. I definitely freaked out, and then I just kind of went into problem solving mode, and reached out to the brand, tried to see what they had, tried to see if anything was similar on the market. There really wasn't much in terms of like chunky yarn and things that were soft and really the material and quality that we needed. And luckily, I had a professor in graduate program that was beginning to do some mentoring with me, and she had a close friend that worked in a sweater department for Talbots. So somehow through the connections and putting it out there that I was working through this problem and getting my business off the ground, I was pointed in the right direction and eventually found a mill that was willing to do a small batch with me in order to get the testing. So it didn't completely solve my problem with getting my orders done. I did have to back out about half of those orders. We were able to salvage the most important of the order, which was from Henry Bendel. It was a really renowned department store in New York City that had placed an order with us and to do some events, and I basically put all the eggs in one basket to keep that relationship going. And somehow made it through. We just kind of learned a lot, and then we kept going. But that was the moment that I recognized that I needed to understand supply chain. I needed to understand the textile production industry, how yarns, fibers, and everything come to be, and really build out the infrastructure of the business in order to think about growing it and turning it into something.
Yeah. I know when I joined Third Piece and you were opening the store, we kicked off the store with Funky Chunky, which is your first run of yarn. And since then, we've gone through three different mills.
Yeah.
Which now the one that we're using is great. The yarn is right where you've kind of wanted it to be since the beginning. Can you talk a little bit about how you've been able to find those mills and where were they?
Yeah, I just remember in the beginning Googling everything. Google was just the best tool that came about, and this was still pretty early in the world of e-commerce and kind of the growth of online entrepreneurship. But I reached out to a bunch of mills, sent samples, had a really hard time with people getting back to me. This first connection with the advisor that worked in sweaters and textiles was in China, overseas in China. So I was able to find an agent that was willing to kind of take on the project. An agent typically would get cut a small percentage of the total order fee, but their job is to oversee the order, make sure that things are delivered and handled on time, and make sure that essentially you are getting what you want. But they kind of work as a liaison between the mill and the company that's placing the order. And depending on how big you are, that depends on how much attention you're gonna get. So I was still very, very small, talking a couple $1,000s worth of yarn, which was everything to me at the time, but to a big company that's also producing yarns for Uniqlo and bigger brands. It was a risk on their part to even entertain a conversation with me.
Yeah, that's it's so nuts. And also too, over the last few years since you've opened the store, you realized, we're Boston based, we sell knitwear, but also once spring and summer hits, kind of have to transition a little bit. So you started curating yarns to come into the store, which is become part of the business, which is great. And kind of to fast forward a little bit, we've had this great run with our suppliers, but now we're kind of back to your first year at Third Piece, and that's kind of what brought on us really kicking off this series is because we wanted to be able to talk to our customers about the difficulty of
being a business
and getting the yarn that's the most important part of the company. So let's talk a little bit about what we're running into in terms of challenges with our third-party yarn brands that we've brought on.
I think in general, just kind of speaking from a consumer aspect, I think we're all seeing things just take so much longer, whether it's furniture you ordered or things that you might have bought in delivery, in terms of getting the things that you had hoped to be getting that you might be buying online. But there's just a huge setback in terms of the world and the global scale of manufacturing getting back up on its feet to be able to meet the demands of what's going on right now. You take a look, pretty much all of our materials, our wool and the yarns that we're manufacturing are either coming from Italy and Peru currently. Those are the two main countries that we're sourcing from on a global level for our bigger batches. And these are two countries, like many second and third world countries, that are just continuing to figure out the path out of it. They're not getting the vaccine rollouts like we are. They're still operating under restrictions and lockdowns, modified hours for their teams, and these are countries, especially in South America, that are already very, very poor. They're very much still figuring out what the post-pandemic life is going to look like in order for them to recover. So those effects are being felt really across the globe. Yeah. That on top of what happened a couple weeks or months ago, at this point, a month ago, in the Suez Canal when that ship that was like sideways, which was kind of like
I
a
know,
meme
it's
and
so
like an
crazy.
ongoing joke, but that ship that was stuck in the Suez Canal for a couple days, it really just screwed up the whole global shipping and logistics ecosystem, and cargo containers that were supposed to go to certain ports and certain destinations got funneled elsewhere, and the main travel routes that, you know, hundreds of thousands of ships were going on got completely either redirected or delayed, and now like the after effect of that is what's messing everything up right now.
It's funny because something clicked when you said about South America and these other countries that are trying to figure out a post-pandemic world, but really they're still living in a pandemic world. We've moved on a little bit with the vaccine and you know, Europe and and America.
It's been 2 weeks and since Memorial Day, and everyone's like,
but like truly, these, I mean, the people that are making the yarn and running these mills, they're still living in a pandemic world. So it is going to be a slower roll. It's a little humbling because we all are just kind of running as fast as we can to get back to normal. But it's good to take a step back and say, you know what, like we can slow down too.
What it means for us as a small business is, like, just to kind of put it out there, like our entire spring summer plan kind of went out the window. You know, like we start designing styles usually about 6 months, I would say. We're always designing, we're always creating, we have things in the back of our mind that we're thinking about. We build products or series on like a design by design basis. We no longer do like full blown collection design, so we are able to be a little bit more scrappy in that respect.
For sure.
But we had all these really fun and exciting, like we just came at spring with this sense of optimism. We definitely, like, especially in January, we were like, the political environment and everything that was going on in the world, we have very deep and very serious conversations with where we think consumers and where we think our community is going to be at when we start to build out products. And we really just sat down in January and we said, it's going to be fun, you know, like we're looking at spring, we're hoping that the world is going to really move forward from this and get back into traveling and get back into going out and reconnecting and being social again. So we had just a really fun time thinking about the pieces we were going to design and where we were going to wear them and how we were going to style them. And then now we're just like waiting for the materials to make that happen.
I know. So Kristen, you know, she always shares everything with the team. And again, that's why I'm so excited to do this, because we get to share what we know with all of you. But she came to us and she said, back in March, like, hey, the cotton, it's not going to arrive until, you know, it was supposed to arrive in April. It's not going to arrive till the end of May. So we said, okay, we can work with that. We kind of figured out a solution. Then come the end of May, beginning of June,
May became June.
She sat us down and said, well, they just told us it's not coming until the end of July. And of course, there's 4 seasons all over the year at all times, but designing our styles around kind of the traditional spring and fashion calendar, that doesn't always work for us. We can't start creating or selling these designs in July. So,
but as a consumer, I think, you know, we've all also just been thinking about things that we buy, like what do we need, what's a necessity, what's something that is nice to have, and also just really being very mindful of the way we shop and who we shop with is something I'm taking away from the last year.
For sure. And I think collectively as a whole, all of the team here at Third Piece think that way, which is why we've started to think of more intentional and different ways to bring in the yarn and the fiber. So let's talk a little bit about just kind of like where we're sourcing from right now, because in the past years, we've always been sourcing from overseas, because that's where, you know, the quality wool that we want to provide our customers are coming from. But now that we've been put into these like hardships of trying to figure out where we can source from, we've been able to discover some really great places. I think there's a lot of pros and cons from overseas to domestic. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think, you know, going back to like where we're at, when I sat the team down and was like, we're screwed. Not that sometimes I say that, or
Surprise.
they use some special words in between. But no, I often have learned to share what's going on and not let it sit. But one of the things when I had shared what's going on is that the team just jumped in with ideas, wanting to get online, find local suppliers, find other brands, and just really think about how we could be thinking about the materials that we bring in a new way. And the easiest and most logical place to start was like as close to home as possible. How can we find either a small batch independent designer, somebody that might be doing things on like a small to medium sized scale, growing their own business? Are there any local mills that we could engage in conversations to see what type of materials they're producing? So we really went at it with a very fresh set of eyes and started doing some research and planning. And it kind of came back to the drawing board with the ways that we could think about building the collection in a very unique, more collaborative type way.
All right, this is like take 3 again. Okay, so we were just talking about where I was going with this, and we can cut this part out, was kind of like the machines not being like, there's just not the technology at the moment.
Yeah.
So when people ask us why we're not sourcing more locally, and I always had this question too, and Kristen kind of informed me that a lot of the technology was sold at some point.
Yeah,
and it's just not there.
I got a tour of a mill up in Maine, and there's just a handful of like mills or yarn manufacturers, textile manufacturers in the States, which some of the information that had been shared with me is that, we were a manufacturing driven country throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s when, America was really a leading global economic country. And then into the 80s, into the 90s, and some of the manufacturing changes that were happening where a lot of companies were taking production overseas, what happened was the machinery and the tools and all of the resources that came along with that expertise and that knowledge went along with it. It's not that the machinery or the technology has necessarily changed. It's just that literally when companies chose to either sell or outsource their process overseas for lower cost labor. So that's where as a society, when we think about job creation or when we think about our output as an economy, we don't have a lot to fall back on in terms of what we produce and what we sell domestically. There's pros and cons to both. I think that the global economy exists for a reason. I think that there are some countries that have really honed in on certain industries like textile production, like in Peru, it's definitely been something that the country has invested in terms of supporting the agriculture and the companies that are starting in those regions. But on the flip side, there has to kind of be a balance to be able to prepare for maybe situations like this, or just think about consumption on a grander, more sustainable scale. So, when you produce things domestically, the good thing is that, you get to talk to people directly. You can talk to them in real time. You don't have the cultural or language barrier that you might have if you're dealing with a factory or an agent overseas. You might be able to really kind of know who you're dealing with and the business and the people that you're supporting from the ground up. Things can probably move quicker if you're working domestically in terms of being able to get things. You don't have to worry about shipping via boat or, air freight and the costs that come along with that. But on the flip side, it can be more expensive. It can be more costly to be able to get your products sourced and grown and manufactured stateside because the cost of a living wage in the States compared to the cost of a living wage in South America. So, there's pros and cons to each one. There's not necessarily a right or wrong. I think it's sometimes taking a look at what's important to you, what's the product you want to create, and what are the values that are important to you as a business and as a consumer in the way you want to shop.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's just a very delicate balance.
Yeah.
You can do a little bit of both.
Yeah.
But I think as long as you're making the conscious decisions, that's really all that matters, because we live in a time where we don't usually make conscious decisions because everything is really served to us on a platter. So that's something that I've liked over the last year, is that it kind of makes you think a little bit more about how you're consuming, what you're consuming, and buying. Which actually segues great into us discussing what we see for the future, what we might see for the future in the industry, but more importantly, what we see for the future as us as a brand. We talk about this a lot.
Yeah.
It's a evolving conversation. We've been talking about this as long as I've been here, and I'm sure Kristen's been talking about it since for the last 9 years. But yeah, so I feel like there's a lot of stuff out there.
It's funny though, because before the pandemic, I was thinking about having to like have a whole bunch of yarn lines and really like build out the third piece labels in terms of being able to offer an array of fibers and materials that go into our collections. Having your own line of yarn, it's very capital intensive. It takes a lot of money to be able to get the initial batch run. You have to develop it and quality test it and get the colors and everything solidified. So it's costly and it takes a long time. So in order to kind of manage expectations and also be realistic with what we have, we're a small business. We can't exactly go take $200,000 and invest in like a bunch of yarn that also you don't know if customers want or need it.
Right.
We really got super scrappy and creative in the ways that we were thinking about the materials. So the first thing we did was we started a collaboration with Geraldine of the Wandering Flock.
Yeah.
That rolled out in May. If you caught any of that, I think there's just a few remaining pieces and just a few skeins of yarn that we have left. But that was true small batch, very intentional, very thought out collaboration that we did. Haley met Geraldine in passing at a knitting marketplace.
Yeah, she has beautiful stuff.
And she purchased a bunch of her yarn and started working with it, came back, shared it. Our design team was really just loving the uniqueness. We went with the mohair silk blend in terms of the fiber, she has a bunch of fibers, but that was the one that we started our collaboration with. And we designed 3 styles in the yarn. We just barely thought about garments and sweaters that we were looking to incorporate into our wardrobe for that like early spring, those kind of like transitional, very texturized and very like romantic kind of sweaters with the color work that she had. But that was small batch, one of a kind. She's based in Brooklyn. She's literally like a one-woman show along with like her husband and maybe the help of like one other person. That's hand painting, hand dyeing these beautiful yarns. I don't even know if we have any near us, but that was like the first kind of like streamlined approach to thinking about yarn and the things that we bring in a very conscious way.
Yeah, for sure. And I think as we move forward, coming up on our fall season, and even as we think to next spring, those are the things that we want to continue doing. We want to continue finding unique designers and brands to work with. We want to continue seeing what's out there. I think I'm most excited over the next 6 months to just explore. Like, it is a little bit new for me to be exploring the fibers and seeing that stuff. So see what's out there. Every minute of the day, someone new is coming up with a new concept. So, we could say today that, we don't know if there's like a chunky merino wool that is like the same quality as ours being made, but maybe tomorrow there will be. Like, there's always new stuff coming out. So we're definitely excited to explore that.
I think that's the kind of like, those are the areas of the business that really excite me, I have to say. When we are able to go to the marketplaces or even just finding people on Instagram in terms of people that are doing unique things, especially in some of the like indie dyeing space or even in the local production space. I've just been really learning a lot about domestic production, and that's where Alex on our team had introduced EchoView Mill to us, and we had a really great call with their creative director, just learning a little bit more about like their process. We're going to do a deep dive on EchoView next week, so stay tuned for that. But they're a local mill based in North Carolina. They're really trying to source their raw materials and doing all their production and dyeing domestically stateside. So those are just ways that we're thinking about it on a much more intentional, direct scale, and really thinking about it from a sustainability and like it just makes sense. It just feels like it makes sense in terms of where we want to go and the direction that we're continuing to move in.
Yeah, 100%. I think less is more is going to be our new motto going into things. So, awesome.
Well,
fun.
thank you for following along. Like we said, this is the first breakdown that we've done. We are open to ideas. If there's a topic you want to learn more about, shoot us a message. Again, follow, like, share, tag a friend if you think it would be of interest to anyone out there. And, subscribe to our newsletter. It's on our homepage at the bottom if you want to stay tuned.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.